Hello and welcome to the Brain Scratch segment brought to you by Yap Central. My name is Aya and I'll be your host for today. If you're new here, this segment is where I'll be releasing any ruminating thoughts into the wild. Most of said thoughts will be based on the books I'm currently reading, but I'm thinking of also branching into other forms of media too. That said, I did a bit of an introduction on the topic we'll be discussing, so if you haven't seen that already, I'd recommend checking it out. It's only like 10 minutes, but it is important that you watch at least the last 5, as that's where I highlight the kind of values and mentality you'll need to have to be able to enjoy these episodes without feeling too triggered. But anyways, moving on. I did hint that we would be discussing philosophy, and the book we'll be learning from is called Teach Yourself Philosophy. I've had this book since high school, and it eventually is what made me change my major in uni, basically from poli-sci to philosophy, which honestly turned out to be like the greatest decision I ever made for myself, to be quite honest. But enough about me, so let's just get right into it. Normally when I do read this book, though, it's out of order based on what I want to learn, and I kind of read it textbook style. But for the sake of making sure everything is clear, we're gonna outline a little bit of how we're going to be doing this. And this is your warning before we start. I want to cover a lot in as few episodes as possible, so this will be long form content. So if you're expecting a quick 10-minute video, this ain't it, baby. Like, I'm so sorry. But I'd still like you to stay. So go find a chore or like a hobby to do, like, while we talk. Because as we speak, I'm crocheting. So you can do some arts and crafts, or honestly, you can just grab a book and a pen because class is now in session. So in terms of what our syllabus is going to be looking like, so naturally we're going to start with the introduction to philosophy, but I do also want to go over the aim of this quote-unquote course, my expectations of y'all, because at the end of the day, I was able to learn so much about myself through learning about philosophy because it helped me kind of understand my way of thinking and my line of thinking. So after I introduce philosophy, I eventually am going to be branching over to logic, as a topic. And I have expectations, and those expectations are for y'all to come here ready to learn, but more importantly, come with an open mind, because this is heavy stuff, not just because of what we'll be talking about, but the things that you'll then have to think about in terms of what you want to change in your life. It's heavy stuff. So I have expectations. And then I'll briefly go over the general outline of the actual chapters as we're going to go through them and what we'll be discussing within those chapters. So, as mentioned, there's an aim. There's always a reason behind everything. So the aim really, as mentioned, for myself is to better mold my values and also have a basic guideline on how to embody them, because it's one thing to know what it is you believe in, it's another thing to act on that. And honestly, the other reason, just personal, I want to get back into reading as an activity. I loved to read as a child. I will say right now I'm not very into reading fiction books as much as I have been diving into nonfiction books, but this is the start for me. I intend to kind of discuss other types of media as mentioned, because I love anime and I love comic books and stuff like that. So I will absolutely be talking about those things in other segments. But yeah, and for my audience, the aim is essentially what I'm hoping is that you're able to figure out your own values to operate by. And I want you to ask the silliest questions you can think of. This is a safe space to explore your unfiltered thoughts, because a lot of what I'll be saying will be my unfiltered thoughts. I definitely have some scripting that I have, but I like to yap, bro. I'm gonna go on tangents every now and then, so be prepared. But you should also be prepared to ask questions, because I want you to. And then when we get into the expectations, these are technically the values that I mentioned in the previous video, but I go into a little bit more depth. But ideally, I want you to come with an open mind, an open perspective, a sense of accountability, as well as a growth-oriented mindset. Essentially, I want you to come as yourself because authenticity is welcomed and encouraged here. And then lastly, this is just the general outline for how we're going to be breaking down the chapters, but also what we'll be discussing within those chapters. I am just going to do the intro on its own, and then we'll be doing chapter 1 to 3. But obviously the introduction is going to be telling you like what the heck philosophy is and how you can understand it a little bit better. So from chapter 1 to about chapter 3, this is where we'll be exploring the foundations of philosophy and the ways it's shaped our way of thinking socially and culturally. So basically, when we're thinking of concepts like totalitarianism, I think that is it. Some words, my goodness. You're going to hear me stutter and stumble a lot. I need y'all to bear with it because editing is annoying, okay? But yeah, totalitarianism or utilitarianism, whatever kind of like, I guess, ideology you have when it comes to like your political thought, we will be able to discuss how that technically is played out within like our real life society. And then when we get to chapter 4 to 6, this is where we go into a bit of a deeper dive. We'll be able to look into the different schools of thoughts as well as their origins specifically. So we'll be talking about the actual philosophers as much as we'll be talking about what it is they're trying to teach us. When we get to chapter 7, this is where we kind of summarize everything that we've learned, and we'll be able to tie it together to real life examples such as our current state of governance or even self-exploration as individuals, whether or not they can be adjusted or changed, as in right now, I would say we live in a very individualistic society where community is not something that is at the forefront, especially if you live in the Western world. And because of that, I think there's reason for us to discuss whether or not we're actually working with the right type of philosophical thought. And maybe if need be, we can maybe figure out a way to change that and to transition. Because honestly, we're at the peak of a recession. People are struggling just to make ends meet. We just passed the holidays. These companies are still trying to get us to do the most for literally damn near nothing. Everything breaks because nothing is made to last anymore. If we are just choosing to still be individualistic while people are suffering at the cost of like the 1%, I fear we've just lost our way as a humanity. So that's part of the aim of this for me. I want to be able to explore the ways in which we can actually change society from the inside first within ourselves, so we have the right tools to do it on the outside. It's not enough to talk about it. We need to be about it. But yeah, so before I get into it, I wanted to share a quote from, I believe he is a Stoic. So this is Marcus Aurelius from 121 to 190 BC. He was a Roman emperor. And the quote is, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." So beyond just wanting to change our thinking as a society, I want you to be able to also know how to change up your thinking so that as we're going through dark times, you can still have the right tools, as mentioned, to flip your mind around so you can keep going, because we can't give up right now. This is not the time to give up. We need as much fight as we can just to be able to kind of get through the day for ourselves, but also for our loved ones and the community that we choose to be a part of. Awesome. So now that you have an idea of what to expect, let's get started. So, as mentioned, we're going to be doing the introduction today, and the introduction is, what is philosophy? According to the Concise Oxford Dictionary, philosophy is defined as seeking after wisdom or knowledge, especially that which deals with ultimate reality, or with the most general causes or principles of things and ideas and human perception and knowledge of them. Physical phenomena, natural philosophy. Ethics, moral philosophy. And I'm sure you mentally checked out as I defined that, because I kind of blacked out too. But in layman's terms, philosophy in itself is just an activity revolving around thought. It's simply the attempt to understand general principles and ideas that lie behind various aspects of life, whether that be politics, religion, the relationship between the mind and the body, science, or even concepts like love. there's so much more you can dive deeper into by simply asking more probing questions about the things that we may only really understand on a surface level, or we only understand in one way because we've only been taught that one way and never in another way. And so the book in particular uses the example of political philosophy. So I'm just going to go to that page. Okay. So it says philosophy is an activity, as mentioned. So it uses the example of political philosophy, saying political philosophy asks questions about justice and equality, about how a state should be organized, and about what is meant by such ideologies and ideas such as democracy. It uses many of the same terms that are found in everyday political debate, but it stops to examine them, to probe a little deeper than does the average politician into exactly what is meant and exactly what the purpose is of the whole enterprise. It asks, what do we mean by this word? How can we know if it's true? And what are its implications? So, as mentioned, if we are choosing to say that we live in a democratic society, are the democratic parties that we're putting into power acting democratically? Or are they just taking on the title and still doing whatever they want? And chances are, it's more conservative or it's a lot more left-wing. Like, you know what I'm trying to say? Just because you call yourself something, are you that thing? It's kind of the idea behind, like, the questions you will be asking or you'll be thinking about within philosophy. So, yeah, as you can see, the questions are kind of a little bit vague. However, the phrasing is done so in a way that we leave room for more complex and, like, detailed answers. Granted, what I mean by detailed isn't necessarily the detailed you're probably common with. When I say detailed, what I really mean is that there's going to be a billion ways that you'll realize that you can describe one specific concept. It's both interesting and mind-numbing, but to be honest, that's that good shit for me. Like, I love being able to ask the bigger questions, but also to be able to get to the foundations of that bigger question. So, yeah, speaking of, in essence, philosophy asks the big questions in all areas of life. However, I do have a disclaimer. This book discusses only Western philosophy. Nothing from the East, which in itself makes it a bit biased in how it teaches philosophy. But all that said, I unfortunately live in the Western world, so it would be more common for these kind of philosophies to be over here, thereby also making it easier to apply to the conversations that we'll be having in terms of, like, the experiences we have. So it's a win-win, I guess, but also a lose-lose because I don't want to be in the Western world. The Western world's spooky, bro. I don't like it over here. I've said this since I came to Canada. I'm not, my body's not resting in this place, bro. But yeah, before I move on though, quick caveat, I was instantly, like, curious about looking into other philosophical teachings that were non-Western. And I'll be honest, I was underwhelmed. Like, I was very underwhelmed, but not in the way that you think. It was more so, I was just not surprised at how hard it was to find just like the most general information. Having to add, like, Reddit after everything has been, like, almost my 13 reason. I can't do it. It's annoying because, like, I love the fact that Reddit has all of these available resources, but I shouldn't have to do that on a search engine that should be able to do that. But AI has just kind of taken over in a way where I don't trust any answers that are provided to me. I need to go, like, directly to the link or a source, and it's harder to find that now. So all that to say, it's just been really sad to see the impacts of colonization and the erasing of, like, cultures and how it's still impacting us at a time when knowledge and accurate information should be easily available. Like, I don't care what anyone says. If most countries have internet to some respect, I know that there's someone out there that's putting out the information. It's right now, it's just a matter of how that information is being allowed to be presented to us. So, yeah, that's all I just had to say on that. But back to the book. In the introduction, we're also introduced to the common divisions of philosophies within the Western world, and those include philosophy of the mind, of religion, of science, and of politics. And there are a lot of ways to, for lack of better words, practice philosophy, but regardless of how it's done, the aim of philosophy is to clarify, whether that's clarification of thoughts, concepts, or even the meaning of the language used to describe the aforementioned. I feel like I'm going to butcher this because I butcher it every time. So this is a quote directly from the book, but it essentially says, "To philosophize is to think clearly and accurately." still didn't look up that word before I did this, but you know what? It is what it is. Yeah, so to philosophize is to think clearly and accurately. And honestly, similar to like natural sciences, we could essentially see the progression of thought and understanding as something is studied further. However, the key difference between natural sciences and philosophy would be that any new way of thinking within the sciences falls under the category of like an anomaly, or usually an exception to the rule rather than becoming the rule itself. Because of this, when it comes to philosophy, as I mentioned, this is the difference. You will often see different schools of thoughts on a lot of the same concepts and, ideologies. But rather than being considered anomalies because they will often differ, the line of thought often tries to overtake the previous one. And this usually is done by arguing the shortcomings of the older thought. However, actually, I'll get into that later on. Anyways, but as mentioned, language is something that is heavily studied within philosophy. And for some philosophers, and for even a specific period of time, like the entire study of philosophy revolved around the terms that we used to determine our stances. And just like the natural sciences, though, there's still a system that is utilized when it comes to testing certain concepts. And when it came to linguistics, there was one that was utilized, which was basically called first order and second order language. Honestly, to put it simply, first order and second language are basically the distinction between your claim and the foundation of that claim. So I need to go back to the book to get the examples because I was not freaking copying that shit. Sorry, try not to swear. I was not copying that into my notes. That would have been a waste of time. But yeah, so as mentioned, it's basically the distinction between your claim and the foundation of that claim. So I'm going to go from like general to more specific. So first order would be A caused B. Second order would be, what does it mean to say that A caused B? So general. And a little bit more specific, is it right to do this? First order. Second order, what does it mean to say that something is right? Hope we're kind of getting the idea here. And then a lot more specific. First order, God does not exist. Second order, what is religious language and how many religious assertions can be verified? So this is kind of the way in which we get to the foundation of the words that we're using to decide what our claim is. And so even the book says, second order language clarifies first order language. In doing so, it also clarifies the thought that lies behind the language. Philosophy is mainly concerned with second order language, and it may not be able to tell you if something is right or wrong, but it will clarify the grounds upon which you make a decision. So it's not to say that, especially with the last one, it's not to say that when you say that God doesn't exist, that you believe that he doesn't exist. It's basically asking like, okay, if you think he doesn't exist, why do you think he doesn't exist? What is God to you? How would you describe God? So we will definitely get into like religious philosophy, but this is kind of like the way of thinking that this is what I'm saying. You have to have an open mind to be able to also look within to see like, what is God to you if you've practiced a faith for as long as you have? Because I've looked into multiple different faiths growing up, like when I was young. But when I was 17, the one that spoke to my heart was Islam. SubhanAllah. So obviously my journey is my own, and I've been able to kind of like learn throughout so that I can really sit in it and be comfortable in it as as proudly as I can. And for years I was saying, I'm a Muslim, but I'm not the best Muslim. But I stopped saying that because I'm like, no, my journey is my own. I'm the best Muslim that I can be at this moment. And inshallah, I'll be able to progress and, get to the stage that Allah wants me at. So that's what I'm saying. You need to be able to dive deep within yourself. So if maybe you grew up Muslim and you went to another path, maybe there's something that was calling you there. So you need to have, as mentioned, an open mind, but also accountability to maybe see where you might have had shortcomings that made it hard for you to practice your religion, and little things like that. So yeah, this is why I always love philosophy. Alrighty, so we're still in the introduction, but this is where you might want to ask yourself from now, and I've already figured out my answer for this. But why study philosophy? So I'm just going to read the page and kind of fill in with my thoughts as I go as to why I also think it's important that everybody should at least like study philosophy. Um, but essentially, it says when you communicate with other people, you use language. That language, unless you are simply repeating what you have heard, springs from your ideas and views. These, in turn, will have come from your experience of life and from your education, which may be influenced to a great extent by the accepted attitudes and views of the society into which you have been born. So, my first thought when I read that, um, actually, I think there was a little bit more, but there was a section where I read a word. I read the word assumption as anticipation for some reason. So, actually, I'll read it out and then you'll understand why this is significant. So it goes on to say philosophy offers you a chance to explore fundamental questions and to see exactly what thinkers in different periods have had to say about them. This in itself is valuable because it frees you from being limited by the unquestioned assumptions of those around you. Don't know why I read that as anticipation, but yeah, that was also to me like kind of an indicator of the fact that we always need to look back into our history in order to understand why it is that things are the way they are. And so it goes on to say to think through issues from first principles is a natural result of having looked at the way in which philosophers have gone about their work. Philosophy also clarifies your thought. The clearer your thinking, the better able you will be to express yourself, and the more accurate your way of examining and making decisions about life. So yeah. First thought, as mentioned, even like from like the very first part where it's like unless you're simply repeating what you've heard, this brought up to me where it's like this world has now been overloaded with so many opinions that I fear now hold little basis due to regurgitation. I can scroll on my For You page and see the same video like 3 times, and it'll be made by 3 separate creators. So this always brought up the question to me where I was very critical about what it was that was shown on my For You page, because oftentimes like it's curated based on what you like, what you look at, even what you look at for too long. Like that FBI agent is working overtime. Like I can't stress that enough. But so there's always a question for me where it's like, what about this particular take is being painted as right, quote unquote, or sometimes popular when we take into like the current social media climate where everything is for a dollar sign basically. So with this quote unquote right take, what might be the external influences that are pushing this narrative? So I'm always wondering like what's going on in society where this is now a little bit more commonly said. When I was growing up, I might not have heard that, or that wasn't something that I saw people openly like speaking on, but it is what it is. So the second thought I had, which was kind of relative to the second paragraph I read, but it was like when you free yourself from the limited thinking of your own upbringing or even from your external environment, you also open yourself to ideals that maybe align with you better. So even if you don't find something that changes your opinion, the win here would be that you can better articulate yourself when you're standing on business. So let's say after you learn about a specific philosopher that you probably thought, oh yeah, like I've always like vibed with them, or I've always vibed with this concept. You now just have the words and the better ways and like reasons that you can actually like stand on that belief. So that's the benefit of philosophy. And let's see. Oh, okay. The assumption part, it's not even on this page. So I was like, I'm missing a note. Anyways, whatever. So the third thought, and it's a little bit off topic, but I fear this is why so many newer progressive content creators still end up being caught with like crazy tweets or stories resurfacing. But it's just because like people are just so quick to think that someone who technically could stand to be a oppressor to you in some regard is also not capable of doing so just because of a few words of allyship. As in, y'all don't be asking enough questions before blindly idolizing people, and that's your problem. So let people show you who they are first and then form an opinion. Because if it's one thing that I will never do is when I see um certain type of demographics speaking on things that I agree with, I take it with a grain of salt. Like, babes, you might have just learned that like last year. This is something that I've been living and been knowing. That's why I'm just like, have you always thought that? Or is this something that you realize maybe because you've diversified your group of friends, or maybe you started experiencing it? Because right now we're in a world where things are very weird. Very, very weird. I don't even want to go into that just yet. But all that to say, we will also be kind of going over the different types of styles of arguments, because that's what I'm saying. Once you have an idea of what it is that you stand for, you'll now, like, philosophy gives you the tools to be able to back that up. So the different styles of arguments that we will go over are like dialogue form arguments, linguistic epistemology, analytical / deductive approach, and then pure logic. So that's also why I have like other books on logic that I really want to get into. I kind of need to study those a bit more because they use basically like math terms, not math terms, but like kind of math terms. So I need to brush up on that. But yeah, let's see here. And the areas that'll of like philosophy that'll be included will be metaphysics, epistemology, linguistics, um, and as mentioned, we'll be going from chapter 1 to about 3, and this will be looking at the different range of philosophical issues. Um, and there will include dialogue of metaphysics and linguistics there. Then when we get to chapter 5 to 6-ish, we're looking at ethics and politics. 7 is where we expand a lot more. And then, yeah. So there is a section at the end of the introduction that basically kind of ties into that bias that I was referring to, where it basically is talking about philosophy and Western thought. So, yes, so this is where I misread the word anticipation. It was appreciation. I read it as anticipation. So, it says each generation builds on the idea and values of the preceding one, sometimes by the way of rejection and change, sometimes by conformity and development. But in any case, it is not possible, for example, to live in Western Europe or the United States without having your language and ideas influenced by generations of thinkers. To be aware of your heritage, sensitive to the way in which ideas and the institution based on them have grown and developed, gives you a greater appreciation of your own culture. Whether that appreciation leads you to criticism or acceptance of all or any of its ideas. So the reason I think I read that as anticipation is because, like, essentially it's saying you need to know your history in order to understand if you believe in that history, if you're okay with that history, or if that history is something that you're not okay with and you don't want repeating. So you have to formulate a plan to change. And so, yeah. Um, when we do get to the next paragraph, it does say it's possible to approach philosophy from a number of different directions. One way is to list the main issues with which it is concerned, and then look at the ways in which different philosophers have examined them. Another is to take a historical overview. In many ways, this latter is the most rewarding, for it reveals the interest of each period in history. It shows the way in which the presuppositions of thinkers arise out of their societal context. So when we do kind of go into that later paragraph, it talks about studying philosophy from a historical lens as a means to understanding how societal influences may have shaped the very ideologies that originated at that time. So there are many variations of this saying, but this is what it reminded me of. But like my favorite variation would be from the Spanish philosopher George Santillanes. And it essentially, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. So right now, I would say we're kind of in a weird place where we're kind of repeating the negative aspects of our past right when we were getting to a point of progression. Especially if you live in the States, like Project 25, Roe v. Wade, like all that stuff was that pushed back. And I don't want that for us. I don't want that for us at all. I'm not even in the States, but I'm so close to the States that God forbid anything were to happen, like that could happen to us. You know what I'm trying to say? Like, I don't want that for us. So this is where philosophy can be described as a little annoying, since even with the latter philosophers, in their attempt to form their own original thought, they are forced to pull from their predecessors to be able to better form that claim. Meaning, even if you just want to study one philosopher, you will be forced to study the rest if you really want to understand. But just like math, you got to learn the foundations to see what your options are when it comes to solving any problem. So now that we got the introduction out of the way, I'll leave it here. before I get into episode 1, but I really hope you enjoyed the video. And as mentioned, as we progress, I hope that if you don't already, that you're able to develop like an open mind, an open perspective, and a little bit of accountability, as well as just maintaining a growth-oriented mindset. But until next time, bye.
She's sweet but a psycho, a little bit psycho. At night she's screaming, I'm on my mind. Oh, she's hot but